Welcome to the MacIver Newsmakers podcast. I'm joined today by Senator John Jagler. We're going to be talking about the governor's budget proposal, but also his whole theme for the year of the kid, the most pro-kid friendly budget in state history. So, John, why don't you start us off? I mean, what were your impressions of, the governor's state of the state and of this budget address?
Well, actually, I kind of broke I did a little faux pas during the state of the state. I actually pulled out my phone and tweeted. When the first time I heard him mention Year of the Kid, the tweet I think I put out was, a year of the kid unless you're a black kid in Milwaukee who can't read. Or you're the kid unless you're a kid struggling to read in any part of the 13th Senate District. Because there was nothing in there about really improving education when it came to Milwaukee. There was no reforms, and it was very frustrating because when I had actually had a chance to meet with him, we kind of badgered him into sitting down with us, and one of the things that he talked about in that meeting was he wanted to do two audits, the MPS looking at their books, which I thought was a welcome. I think more people that can look at that books is great, and then also wanted to do a full educational analysis budget or audit on MPS. And at that time, we didn't know the status of any of those audits. Now the financial one came out, which is great, had some recommendations. But the one I think that's most important that it has to get done is how do we get the education system set up better for these kids in Milwaukee? And it hasn't even started yet. It has not begun, which is crazy to me because, Bill, what I really wanted was, we have a lot of ideas. We've heard from a lot of people on what we can do to fix the Milwaukee Public School District. But we can't get it done unless we have buy-in from the governor. So what I was hoping that would happen would be that audit would give some recommendations of something that we can use as a starting point, saying, okay, I was hoping it would force his hand. And the fact that this hasn't even started yet, there's no urgency to get this done, is really, really disappointing. So, yeah, the year of the kid, unless you're a black kid in Milwaukee, is pretty much should be the subtitle of that.
So, focusing on Milwaukee for a minute here, this is if I were a liberal, if I were a Democrat, I feel like this would be a huge liability. Like every time someone would bring up MPS, I would want to kind of hide under my desk. Like how do those conversations go with your colleagues when MPS comes up? I mean,
well, it's hard when you talk to outstate legislators, folks from up north who obviously are aware of the importance of Milwaukee as an economic driver for the state, but other than that have no connection to Milwaukee. Maybe they go to a Brewer game every 10 years or whatever. It's hard for them to get buy-in on improving Milwaukee and what needs to get done when they turn around and see they blatantly ignore, the school district does, the law when it came to the school resource officer issue, something that was important to us in the shared revenue package. That's hopefully getting close to being resolved, but they ignored it for over a year, flippantly ignored it. So it's frustrating because you look at it, it's a breakdown of every level. You're talking about safety when it comes to the incidents of police coming to these schools over and over again. You're talking about the health of the kids with the lead issues now that are apparently more widespread than initially even reported. And then just the full breakdown of educating these kids. The scores are horrible. And what's the response, Ben? Well, the response from the Department of Public Instruction, rather than trying and encouraging institutional change in Milwaukee, is to lower the scores, to make it look like it's better. It just doesn't. It's hard to get buy-in from outstate legislators to say, hey, we really need to focus on X, Y, and Z in Milwaukee, when you have community leaders, you have leaders in the district, and you have state educational, part of the educational bureaucracy, not willing to make big changes at all or even sit down and talk about it. It's very frustrating.
All right, so when you talk to Democrats, though, other than we need more money.
That's the answer to everything.
That's all they got.
More money. And you look at this Year of the Kid that the governor put out, even his budget, yes, there's more money for education. But, his focus on Year of the Kid is we need to make sure they're fed. We need to it was basically a big increase in free meals, school lunch. My kids didn't need free lunch. There's a lot of families that don't, that money shouldn't go. My kids, if they wanted lunch, we paid for it. Wisconsin still has 61% or 61 million meals that go out that we pay for, which is great. Don't get me wrong. There's folks that need it. There's kids that do need breakfast in the morning, and kids that certainly need lunch. But 60% of that 61 million served are already free or ridiculously low reduced that are able to pay for, these kids can get the meals that they need. But the solution that the governor puts out is just free meals for everybody, free breakfast and free lunch for every kid. That doesn't make any financial sense at all.
So I don't run for political office, so I can take difficult positions on things. And, I look at that free breakfast, free lunch. To me, I see that not as a pro-kid measure. I see that as an anti-family measure. I don't see, I turn that around the government. I say, this is not the government's job to feed kids. And if a kid is showing up to school habitually hungry without a lunch, not being fed breakfast, you need to go after the parents. So, this whole, it seems like a lot of the governor's budget is about enabling bad families and, just taking that off your plate.
Well, a lot of the message was, we're going to be the parents here. That's what the whole budget address was. The wraparound services that are required. It's like, where were the parents in all this mix? Now, like I said, I'm probably not as opposed to the idea of free lunch as you are when it comes to kids who need it, because there's certainly some kids that come there and it's hard. That actually is hard for the parents, or hard for the teachers rather. It's hard for the school to get by, and certainly hard for these kids. There's certainly those that need it, but the point is we are paying for those kids. That's a problem that doesn't need to be solved. We are helping on a super reduced lunch for kids that can't afford it, and free lunch for a lot of the kids. We're already doing that, and just to the blanket free for everybody, it's just not wise, not good policy.
And what are some of your thoughts then on some of these other issues, like special education and mental health and things like that?
Well, again, there's no question that special education funds are a drain on school districts. But the fact of the matter is, we've increased those funding. We've increased the funding. We got up to a level that when he was superintendent of public schools, he set a goal. We should be at this amount. And that was in his budget, his wildest dreams budget. We matched that on a percentage of special education funding. They do have to provide these services. They are going to be provided, and we already put a substantial amount in when it comes to education. It was the largest investment in Wisconsin history in the last budget. So I imagine in this next go around, there's going to be another increase when it comes to that on special education funding. But the mental health service is a tough one to crack, because not only do you have a need, certainly, and certainly since post-COVID, some kids that just lost developmental years from being able to socialize and things like that, particularly looking at the third graders and now the 10th graders currently. There's definitely some mental health needs there, but the other problem is, who's going to provide these services? There's not a lot of providers available. Even if we had all the money in the world to give to get therapists in, to get social workers in at this level, to get child psychiatrists, there's just not enough of them to do that. So it's a fine line on throwing money at where is it going to go and how's it going to be best utilized.
Now, from my perspective, when it comes to mental health, I agree. I mean, COVID, shut down the schools, that was disaster across the board. But to me, on the other hand, it feels like these schools also do a lot to create this problem in the first place. We talk about all this, DEI. We talk about all this LGBTQ type grooming stuff, especially like here in Madison. So to me, it feels like the public school system is creating is a large contributing factor in creating this problem, and now Governor Evers wants the public schools to also have money to help solve the problem.
Well, and just the educational atmosphere that's created when you focus on these things, you amplify the path to be aggrieved. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like, okay, well, I don't fit in. This doesn't happen to me, but wait a minute. Maybe this part isn't, and I should get help here or whatever. I just look back, my youngest son graduated several years ago. He was born in 2000, okay? And he was having to do a white privilege walk. So he came home from school. So, what'd you do from school today? And he said, well, they lined up our class on the auditorium stage, and said, take one step forward if your parents are still married. Take a step back if you're divorced or you're a single parent household. Take 2 steps forward if you're white. Take 3 steps back if you're not white. If your family has a college graduate of a parent, take 2 steps forward. And it was funny because I said, well, how did that make you feel? He said, well, I actually had to get off the stage. He said, and I said, did it make you feel bad? And he said, no, I felt bad for the kids, not that they were in that situation where, if there's 2 steps forward or steps back, if there's substance abuse in your family at any point. So that they were trying to out these kids, that they made them do it in front of us. It's like, wait, I didn't know that about you. It just was completely different. He said, I think they wanted to make me feel bad. He said, but there are some of the kids that were up at that level that gone off the stage that were like high-fiving as they, I said, maybe you didn't get the message that the teacher was trying to give there. So, but I mean, it gives them a megaphone and puts ideas in their head that they're being aggrieved and something's wrong and they need something for it.
All right, I got to point. Your kids are all out of school, right?
Yeah.
All right, I got to point out. You're from Watertown.
Yeah.
This isn't Madison or
Sure. It's a conservative city by any stretch of the imagination. By voting rights, so that was happening in Watertown High School. The white privilege walk, they called it.
Yeah, with a lot of these issues in public schools, a lot of people will have the tendency to just say, oh, that's Milwaukee, that's Madison, that doesn't happen here. When I was on VCY television about a year ago, we wanted to talk about some of these issues, and I put together a montage from the local newscasts around the state of all the school fights in Wisconsin, and I purposely excluded the urban cities.
Yeah.
I want to show, hey, the problems that we talk about with public education in Wisconsin, this is across the board. This is happening in the suburbs. They're brutal schoolyard fights, and suburbs of Green Bay.
This is happening. Actually, you mentioned Watertown. It's funny you say that. Right now, Riverside Middle School, which is the only middle school in Watertown, the kids are going to be taking part in next week a survey about how politics makes them feel if they get polarized. It's something about this group is trying to study the polarization of politics in Wisconsin right now and how it makes kids feel. And they have do you have any of these feelings? Check through. And the only reason why we knew about it is because they sent out a letter to parents saying, hey, you can get your kids to opt out. There's going to be a lot of families that are going to opt out of that. It's like, what are we doing here? Why are you making kids... If this is a problem, if the polarization, why are you amplifying it and putting this in front of kids right now? It's a strange world right now.
So I'm, like I was saying, I see Governor Evers, you're the kid and pro kid budget. To me, I see this from the flip side. Okay, you mean anti-family, you're the government parent, things like that.
Yeah.
This is an anti-family budget. I can talk about this stuff openly. I work for a think tank institute. Pretty free for me. How do you, as a lawmaker, though, counter these narratives? When the governor says, "I am pro-kid," if you aren't for me, then you're anti-kid.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I counter it by just pointing out his own words when it comes to, expecting more for our kids. Which we all should. And he did as superintendent, set high standards for our kids. You can counter it by his own words when the superintendent, Jill Underly, lowers our standards for Wisconsin, which nobody was asking for, by the way. She does it. Governor Evers calls it a mistake, says it's a bad idea, then rips the process of which she did it, which is behind closed doors and with this group of this magic group of educators that she talked to, lowers our standards, and it'll be interesting. What I do is I point out the hypocrisy here. The bill, AB 1, I authored it to restore our standards, to go back to the high standards that the superintendent then, Evers, put in place. Not one Democrat voted in favor of it. What's the governor going to do? As we move this forward going through and we pass it in the Senate, I'm sure we will. Will any Democrats vote for it? I don't know. What's the governor going to do? In the year of the kid, something he truly believes in and has articulated that he believes in. We should have high standards. It's a mistake to lower them. Here's a bill to go back to those high standards. What are you going to do in the year of the kid? Are you going to sign this bill? I'm not a betting man, but I would bet that he's not going to. I bet he's going to veto it, which is crazy to me. And no one will call him out on it except us. Yeah. You know, like you said, it was a mistake to lower the standards. How can you veto this bill? Now, maybe I'm not giving enough credit. Maybe in the year of the kid, he will come to the realization, yeah, we should go back to those standards and sign it. So that's what we can do as conservatives in the building, as folks that are listening to this message and wondering what is going on in our schools, what is going on in our families, is point out the hypocrisy, drive good policy, fund things that we truly believe in, and keep on pushing through with the fight. And like I said, pointing out the hypocrisy is a big part. It's easier to do now with social media. It really is to get the word out.
Yeah, so I mean, like with Governor Evers, you know, I've watched him over the years. I talk about this stuff all the time. Yeah, he's a hypocrite. He has no problem saying one thing on one day, then saying the exact opposite the next day. He's got no shame with that. You know, in terms of, you know, when Jill Underley lowered the standards, he did criticize it. She wasn't his preferred candidate for the superintendent race. His preferred candidate is out now, so it's between her and a moderate. So, I mean, obviously he painted himself into a corner there a little bit, because now is he backing Underley, or is he staying out of this race? And how are other Democrats, you know, have the conversations, has the atmosphere in this building changed since Jill Underley was selected by the voters to be the liberal candidate in that race, and the preferred, more radical candidate was kicked off the ballot? We
haven't met yet, and we haven't had conversations, but they will do what they do, and they do it quite well. They'll circle the wagons. Mm-hmm. I have no doubt about that. They will circle the wagons, and even though that there is an obvious push against her from many of her traditional past voters, they will circle the wagons because they see a threat. And you know, if you talk to folks who have been around this argument for a while, who've been in the legislature for a while, and if you have an honest conversation with the governor, school choice is not going away. You know, unless something crazy drastic happens. They've kind of resigned the fact that this is a losing argument. That it's starting to win over not just conservative. It's starting the popularity of giving parents an opportunity to go to the school of the kids, to go to the school of their choice, is settled in, and except for that small subset that keep on fighting. So it'll be interesting to see how hard they're going to fight. You know, you look at the governor in the last budget and in the package that was done, and we got the increase for the voucher amount, mm-hmm. which was huge. It saved a lot of these schools. The governor got his teeth kicked in from that establishment because of that. And I don't know if he anticipated that it was going to be as bad as it was, but they were really mad at him for doing that. But it helped a lot of families, helped a lot of schools keep their doors open. And the dividends of choice and charter are pretty obvious when you look at test scores, when you look at even just giving families a choice and opportunity to get out of schools that are danger zones right now in some districts. So we're going to keep fighting that. Whether we keep on bringing more folks with us, I don't know, but there's still going to be folks in this building that maybe don't represent the views of Wisconsin in general, that they're still going to hold. They're going to hold on to that argument forever.
Now with the
and some are on the Senate Education Committee.
Oh, great!
Or at least one.
Yeah. So, all right. So with you're pro kid versus anti family. I think Governor Evers. He gave me a gift the other day with my argument that it's anti family, and his inseminated persons versus mothers.
And that's another example where I can say with almost certainty that he did not know that was in there written like that. He didn't write that in there. Inseminated persons and changing the name of fathers and all that. I mean, that was a staff thing that was in there. It was actually a leftover thing from the previous budget, I even believe. I mean, it was in there, but it just to see what happened with that. And I knew it was going to, too. Mm-hmm. As soon as I saw we were going through, it was found by staff. The process is the governor introduces his budget. We're going to do what we always do. We throw it away and start from, because it's full of tax increases. It's just a garbage, not a sustainable package, not a realistic spending package at all, full of policy items. But staff still have to go through there and take a look. And staff, inseminated person. instead of mother. Like the reaction, you knew it was going to hit right away. It wasn't like that was going to offend everybody. And I made a slight joke about it. People they got mad at me. I said, well, it's going to make it difficult for Hallmark, to change Mother's Day cards to Happy Inseminated Persons Day. But I mean, it really offended a lot of women, and it should. It's crazy, and the justification for it, and when he gets called on it, was to double down and say we're lying. Well, we're not lying. You put that in the budget. It's right there, multiple times, over and over and over again. But it just shows this disconnect between reality and where they're at. But that's something that we even had own members of family come up saying, "What in the world? What is this guy doing?" It's a national embarrassment. It really is. I mean, it was on. It's been amplified everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's being talked about everywhere, and he can try to justify it all he wants, but it's still it's going to hit him. That's going to stick on him for a while.
So, my immediate reaction to the budget. First of all, this is Governor Evers' gajillion-dollar budget because they don't release the budget until after the speech. So all I'm hearing is $100 million for this, $100 million for that, cut taxes. It's like, wait, so you're lowering revenue and increasing spending? But to me, it was my first reaction was Governor Evers would never have given this budget, would never have proposed this budget to a Democrat legislature. Because he was making the political calculation that I can ask for the moon and stars for everyone, and I know the Republicans won't even entertain this thing. They're just going to throw it away, and I can now campaign to all the targeted constituencies that I identified in that budget and say, I wanted to give you this, but Republicans wouldn't let me do it.
That's a good point. That would not have been presented as a realistic budget because it wasn't realistic. It took a $4.3 billion surplus and turned it into a $4 billion deficit in 2 years. Mm-hmm. That's really hard to do. I mean, it's incredible. And you look at the $2.4 million in tax increase, or $1 billion in a tax increase. You look at the figures, it's staggering. And it's one of the things that's in there that hasn't been talked about very much is it also allows counties to increase their own sales tax by 0.5%.
And cities.
Yeah. That's, you talk about if this is the year of the kid, year of the family, you're tying them up. And it's going to make it harder on families all across the state if this was a real spending package. Thankfully, it's not. We're going to ditch it, and we're going to start over and bang away at what we laid the groundwork on last session.
Now, you personally, what would you like to see in this budget? Just broad ideas, not not specific.
We have the surplus. We got to give it back to the taxpayers, and we've been presented with a lot of different ideas. I know Assembly and Senate leadership are going to come together on some type of plan. At this point, I don't think there is a bad idea when it comes to cutting taxes. I'm for let's do everything we possibly can. There's even some point if we can't get to some agreement of just throwing it back and doing the old tax rebate check thing again, real money. I don't care, but we got to get that money back. So that's my main priority for this budget. The school education funding and things like that, I'd like to see a little increase in special education funding if we can nibble around the edges there. But a lot of the school funding's been baked into the cake already with a 400-year veto. So we have a dollar figure we're going to work at. But the top priority for me and for our office is giving this money back to the taxpayers. It's their money. It's just sitting here. And even if we spent it, and we did do some wise spending in the last budget on one-time funding, on building things, paying cash. That's smart. But when it comes to giving it back, let's give it back in the best way. And there's different thoughts on how to do that, whether it's an income tax collapsing of the brackets, if it's making retirement income, non-taxable. We put that bill on his desk last session. There's all kinds of ways to do it. We just got to get it done and get that down and get it back into the hands of the taxpayers who do need it right now.
When I talk about Governor Evers just being he's a hypocrite. He's got no shame. When you talk about like the huge increase you got for school choice last year, people might not remember, but there were a lot of deals that had to be hammered out with the governor before that budget made it across the finish line. And even with all those deals, and you guys were smart about, okay, you sign this first and then we'll do this. Yeah. But even with all those deals, with all those agreements, he turned around and stabbed you guys in the back and made that 400-year veto. So how does that affect,
The ramifications of the 400-year veto are still going. They're going to be ongoing for a long time because there was a deal. That was a deal cut. We had the votes. We passed it. We sent it to you. You ran on that budget or will run on that budget and the tax cuts that were in it. Great. You get to do that. You signed it. You're the governor. That's, that's part of the deal. But that process of the 400-year veto and what it did for any good faith, if there was some, it just made it go away. It's frustrating when you and then it's not that. You look at the shared revenue package that went through that was approved. Well, some of the things that we put in there, one was the school resource officer thing. It was important to me. Let's put the cops back in schools, make it safe. Great, completely ignored. Well, how does that go forward now in this budget to talk? Who are we negotiating with? Do we have a good faith actor on the other side? How can you say you're not going to play games with this? So it'll be interesting to see as the court cases move through on the veto, on the Act 20 funding for the literacy bill that he made a non-spending bill line item veto. That changes the game on how we can do things. It changes the way of how this building's been operated for years on both Democrat control and Republican control. So everything's been upended, Bill. We don't know how this is going to play out with the court cases hanging over, with the bad faith that was established by those vetoes. We don't know how this is going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, like me being, really analyzing this budget and, following the stuff closely. I mean, I look at this and I mean, the budget, ideally is signed into law, vetoes and everything by June 30th because the next fiscal year starts on July 1st. I don't see how that happens because there are certain components of this, like the administrative rules process, for example. I don't know how you guys can write a budget before you know what the rules of the game are going to be.
Well, even on everything, exactly. The rules of the game have changed, but I mean, even on stuff like stewardship that had GFC oversight on all, how do we put any money into stewardship? Whether you believe in it or not, how do we put any money into it if there's no legislative oversight? That's always been there because of what he did. I don't know. I don't know how a budget gets done, Bill. It's going to be leadership's going to have to figure this out. The Joint Finance Committee is going to have to get to work. We do need to present him with a spending package, but how do we do that? Do we give him the policy first and fund it later? How do we know he's going to follow precedent of established law and not challenge it with the court that he has? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and
we'll do our work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I keep saying, this is not a normal year. I know you start talking about budgets and government spending, people's eyes glaze over, but I mean, this is really, there are a lot of critical issues being worked out right now. This is, constitutional government is being redefined here in Wisconsin, and I'm sure most people have no idea the ramifications of a lot of these fights. So.
Absolutely, and a lot of it is again to be determined as we watch some of these court things come through. What gets presented before the high court? When does that? What's the timetable on some of this stuff? I don't know. It's going to make for every session's different. This one's even more different than past, I guess.
Yeah. Well, John, I mean, you and I mean, we're both, broadcasters. We'll talk all day if I didn't run out of tape. But I know I got to let you go so you can get ready for your next meeting here in a few minutes. But thank you very much for joining us on the MacIver Newsmakers podcast today.
You got it. Thanks, Bill.